Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got some really interesting data you sent over focusing on a market maybe not everyone knows by name, but it's definitely relevant.
That's right. We're talking about 2-methyl propenoic acid today.
Exactly. And the numbers come from cognitive market research. Pretty detailed stuff.
Yeah, it gives us a great look, global, regional, right down to the country level.
Yeah.
There's 2021 through to 2033 projections.
And it includes those all-important KGRs, the growth rates.
Mm-hmm.
So our plan today is to really dig into these figures, see what story they tell us about this market past present and where it seems to be going.
Find out what's driving things.
Yeah, what are the big takeaways you should know? Okay, let's unpack this.
Sounds good.
But hang on, before we dive into the numbers, maybe just quickly 2-methyl propenoic acid for anyone listening who's thinking, what is that?
Right. Good point. So think of it as a key chemical ingredient, a building block.
Okay.
Its main job is really in making other chemicals, specifically esters. And those are used in a ton of things. Like acrylic paints, coatings, also high-strength adhesives, think construction, manufacturing.
Yeah, okay.
Certain types of plastics, too. And importantly, it pops up in some water treatment processes.
Gotcha. So tracking this market actually tells us something about those bigger industries, building, manufacturing, paints, even water quality.
Exactly. Its demand reflects what's happening downstream.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's start with the big picture then, the global view. What are the headline figures from the source?
Right, globally. In 2021, the market revenue was about $1,068.8 million.
Okay, over $1 billion.
Yep. And the forecast shows pretty steady growth. By 2025, it's expected to hit $1,260 million.
And further out, say 2033.
Looking out to 2033, the projection climbs to $1,751.1 million.
So a decent upward trend over the whole period. What's that work out to as an overall growth rate?
The global CAGR, that's the compound annual growth rate.
Right.
From 2021 to 2033, it's projected at 4.2%.
4.2%. Pretty solid, steady growth then.
It is. And like we were just saying, this isn't just numbers in isolation. It's directly linked to demand from those key areas.
Plastics, adhesives.
Exactly. Coatings, water treatment solutions, as those sectors grow around the world, well, they need more of this basic chemical.
Right, the demand pulls it through. Okay, let's start breaking that down. How about North America? How does that region look?
North America is a really significant chunk of the market. Back in 2021, it was valued at $367.7 million.
Okay.
The forecast sees it reaching $424.9 million in 2025, and then $580.6 million by 2033.
And the growth rate for the region?
The COGR for North America is projected at 4%. So pretty much right in line with that global average we just saw.
Interesting. Okay, and does the source give us a country breakdown within North America,
Yeah.
U.S., Canada, Mexico? Is it all growing at that same 4% pace?
No. That's where you start to see some interesting variations. It's definitely not uniform.
Oh, tell me more.
So the United States, it's the dominant market there, no surprise.
Biggest economy.
Right. Started at $290.1 million in 2021. Projected to reach $436.8 million by 2033. Huge numbers.
Still the lion's share.
Absolutely. But its growth rate, its CAGR, is actually a bit lower than the regional average. It's forecast at 3.6%.
Huh. So big, but maybe growing a little slower than its neighbors.
Seems that way based on these projections, yeah. Because if you look at Canada and Mexico, they're smaller markets overall, but...
They're growing faster.
Exactly. Canada's projected CAGR is 4.9%. It's expected to go from about $42.3 million up to $78.5 million.
Almost 5%. That's pretty strong.
It is. And then Mexico shows the highest growth rate in North America.
Really?
Yeah, projected CAGR of 5.3%, growing from $35.3 million to $65.3 million over that same 2021 to 2033 period.
5.3%. Wow. Okay, that is a noticeable difference compared to the U.S. rate. Does the source suggest why, like specific industries booming in Mexico or Canada?
The data points more generally to, industrial growth and application needs across the region. It doesn't quite detail why Mexico's rate is projected so much higher. But seeing that 5.3% versus 3.6% definitely suggests, well, maybe faster industrial development or quicker adoption in those sectors using this acid down there.
Fascinating stuff. It really shows how these aggregate numbers hide different stories underneath. Okay, let's hop across the pond. Europe, what's the situation there?
Europe's another major player,
Yeah.
very similar regional CGR to North America and the global average, actually, also projected at 4%.
Okay, and the market size?
It started at $337.7 million in 2021, forecast to hit $536.7 million by 2033.
Right. And Europe's obviously very diverse. How does it break down by country? Any standouts?
It is diverse. Germany, being the largest economy, naturally has the biggest slice.
Makes sense.
It's projected to grow from $60.5 million to a neat $100 million by 2033. That's a 4.2% CAGR, right on the global average again.
Okay. What about others? France, UK?
France is substantial too, but the growth is projected a bit more moderately, around 3.4% CGR, moving from $44.6 million to about $65.9 million.
So slower than Germany.
Yeah, and we see a similar kind of pace in Italy and Russia as well. Their KGRs are around the low threes. Italy, for instance, $32.1 million up to $45.9 million. Russia, $54.4 million heading towards $80.1 million, a 3.2% CAGR.
So some of the big European economies seem to be on a solid, but maybe more, let's say, mature growth path.
That seems a fair way to put it.
Yeah.
But it's not the whole story for Europe.
Yeah.
The UK, for example, is projected to grow a bit faster. Its KGR is forecast at 4.8%.
Okay, higher than France or Germany.
Yep, going from $28.4 million to $50.7 million. And Spain's looking similar, $30.1 million projected to $45.2 million.
Right.
Even smaller players like Luxembourg show steady growth, 4.2% CAGR on smaller numbers, of course.
Right.
But what's also quite interesting is the rest of Europe category in the data.
What does that show?
That chunk actually shows pretty strong growth, projected at 5.2% CAGR.
5.2, so faster than the major economies we just listed.
Exactly. Growing from $39.2 million to $73.6 million. It suggests there's quite a bit of dynamic growth happening, perhaps in smaller or faster developing European economies outside the big names.
That's a great point. You can't just average it out. That rest of Europe tells its own story. Okay, let's shift focus now to Asia-Pacific. The source seemed pretty bullish on this region, didn't it?
It did, yes. Asia-Pacific is pegged as the fastest growing major region overall.
And the rate?
The regional scene KGR is projected at 4.5%. Market size starting at $238.3 million in 2021 and forecast to reach $411.9 million by 2033.
4.5%. Okay, so clearly a key growth engine. Who's leading the charge within Asia-Pacific? China, I assume.
China's is definitely the dominant force in terms of sheer market size, yes, valued at $103.4 million back in 2021.
And growing strongly.
Yep, projected to hit $183.8 million by 2033. That's a robust 4.8% CAGR, so big and growing fast.
Okay. What about Japan?
Japan reflects more of that mature economy pattern we saw in parts of Europe. Slower growth projected, around 3.7% CAGR, moving from $16.2 million to $26 million.
Right. But you mentioned Asia-Pacific overall was the fastest growing. So besides China, where's that speed coming from?
Well, the real standout for growth speed in this data set, especially for a larger market, is India.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Standout for growth speed in this data set, especially for a larger market, is India.
India. How fast are we talking?
India's projected Fed QGR is 5.2%.
5.2. Wow. That's up there with that rest of Europe figure.
It is. For India, that means growing from $28.1 million in 2021 to potentially $53 million by 2033. That really points towards significant industrial expansion happening there.
Absolutely. Demand for plastics, coatings, adhesives must be booming.
You would certainly suggest that. And other countries are contributing too. South Korea and Australia, for example, both showing solid growth around 4.1% CAGR.
Okay.
And the source lumps together Southeast Asia, which collectively is growing steadily too, at 4.6% CAGR.
So Asia-Pacific's strong performance is really a mix China's huge scale combined with really rapid expansion in places like India and solid growth across the board.
That sums it up well.
Okay. What about the other regions? South America.
South America is a smaller part of the global picture compared to North America, Europe, or Asia-Pacific. But it's still showing consistent growth.
What kind of rates are we seeing there?
Generally in the sort of 3% to 4% range. Brazil is the key market there.
Biggest economy in the region.
Exactly. Projected to grow from $30.2 million to $48.2 million by 2033. That's a 3.9% CAGR.
Okay, solid.
Argentina follows pretty closely, a 3.8% CAGR. Yeah. Moving from $12.2 million towards $19 million.
Right.
And then you have countries like Colombia, Peru, Chile also expanding. Colombia from $6.2 million is at $9.8 million. Peru projected to reach $7.6 million. Chile $7.2 million by 2033, with KGRs in the low threes.
So steady as she goes in South America, basically, led by Brazil.
Pretty much, yes. Consistent expansion.
All right. That leaves one major area, the Middle East and Africa. And I remember seeing some, let's say, eye-catching numbers in the source data for this region.
Yes. This is where, as you say, it gets really interesting. Some of the projected growth rates here are, well, Quite remarkable.
Okay, lay it on me. What stood out?
Well, within the Middle East portion, Egypt is projected to lead the growth charge, a 5.8% CAGR.
5.8. That's higher than India or Mexico that we talked about.
It is. Expected to basically double its market size from $2.9 million up to $5.9 million by 2033, and Turkey isn't far behind at all.
How fast for Turkey?
Projected at 5.6% CAGR, growing from $3.9 million to $7.8 million.
Wow.
And the rest of the Middle East category also shows steady growth, 4.5% CAGR, moving from $10.2 million towards $18.2 million.
So already the Middle East is showing growth above the global average, but I feel like there was an even bigger number hiding in Africa.
You are absolutely right. The single highest projected CAGR in this entire data set anywhere in the world is for South Africa.
How high are we talking?
A projected 6.8% CAGR.
6.8%. Goodness. That's significantly faster than anywhere else we've discussed.
It really is. The projection takes South Africa's market from $10.4 million in 2021 up to $23.4 million by 2033, more than doubling.
What could possibly be driving that kind of acceleration? Is it tied to water treatment maybe, or massive infrastructure?
The source doesn't give the specific why for South Africa's rate being so high. But you're right. Given the uses of 2-methyl propenoic acid, strong growth like that could absolutely be linked to expanding manufacturing, major infrastructure projects, maybe including water treatment facilities, or just booming demand for coatings and adhesives in construction or other developing industries there.
Incredible.
And Nigeria is right up there too. Not quite 6.8%, but still very high at 6.1% CAGR.
Another one over 6%.
Yeah, projected to grow from $4.9 million to $10.3 million.
Wow. Those numbers for South Africa and Nigeria really do stand out, don't they? It underlines how dynamic things can be, maybe signaling some serious industrial shifts happening in those parts of Africa.
It's a powerful reminder, yeah. You can't just look at the billion-dollar markets. Sometimes the most interesting trends, the fastest acceleration, is happening elsewhere.
Absolutely. So when you pull all this together, what's the main takeaway?
Well, what's fascinating here, I think, is seeing this tapestry of growth rates. The overall market for 2-methyl propenoic acid is clearly healthy. It's growing globally.
Right, that 4.2% overall.
Exactly. But the engine of that growth, it's running at very different speeds in different places. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows that demand from manufacturing, coatings, adhesives, water treatment, it's not a uniform wave. It really reflects specific regional economic trends, national development patterns, maybe industrial policies or investments. It's quite a mosaic.
Yeah.
What stands out most to you seeing all these numbers laid out?
For me, it's exactly that variation you mentioned, the fact that you can have mature economies growing steadily at 3-4%, while others like Mexico, India, Egypt, and especially South Africa and Nigeria are projected to grow much, much faster. It shows market growth isn't just one story. So what does all this mean for you listening and trying to make sense of this market?
I think it means looking beyond just the chemical name. These numbers, they're signals, they're indicators of where real-world activity is picking up.
Where things are being built, made.
Precisely. Where demand is rising for materials that are, well, fundamental to so many products we use or infrastructure we rely on. Understanding these regional differences, these nuances, is really key to getting a true feel for where the market and maybe related industries are headed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This deep dive using the cognitive market research data has definitely painted a vivid picture. A market growing pretty consistently across the board, sure, but with this really fascinating range of speeds and dynamics underneath.
From the steady churn in North America and Europe,
to that faster pace in much of Asia Pacific, and then those really high-flying projections in parts of the Middle East and Africa. Especially South Africa and Nigeria, it's a story of diverse growth, really specific to different parts of the globe.
It really is. And maybe a final thought to leave you with.
Please.
These different growth rates, they don't just tell us about this chemical market. They hint at potentially bigger shifts, right? Where might global manufacturing be concentrating its expansion in the next decade? Where is infrastructure development creating the most demand?
Good question.
Thinking about why South Africa might be projected at nearly 7% growth, while Germany is at 4%. what underlying economic or industrial stories could explain that difference? That's the kind of deeper question these numbers invite you to think about.
That's a great takeaway. It definitely makes you look at global economic trends with maybe a sharper lens. Well, thank you again for providing the sources that allowed us to do this deep dive today.
My pleasure.
Hopefully digging into these numbers helps you understand the dynamics, not just of this specific market, but maybe encourages you to keep noticing the foundational materials and chemicals that are quite literally building the world around us.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are really getting into the weeds on a key chemical you probably encounter all the time, maybe without realizing it. Methacrylic acid.
That's right. Also known as 2-methyl propenoic acid, if you want the full technical term. It's a fundamental building block for a lot of modern materials.
A bit of a hidden workhorse, you could say. And we're basing our chat today on excerpts from a market analysis called Methacrylic Acid Market: Dynamics, Drivers, and Innovations.
And our goal really is to unpack what makes this market tick. Look at the forces pushing it, the challenges holding it back, and some of the really interesting innovations shaping where it's going.
Exactly. And why should you care about, well, methacrylic acid? Because it's a window into so many industries.
Yeah.
Automotive, electronics, construction, even personal care. It's surprisingly central. Okay, let's dig in.
So where do we start? Maybe with the driving forces. What's actually pushing growth in this market, according to the analysis?
Yeah, let's do that. And right at the top, the analysis points squarely at the demand for PMMA, polymethyl methacrylate.
Ah, yes, PMMA. That makes perfect sense. It's that clear, very lightweight, but highly impact-resistant polymer. Think of it as a sort of high-performance plastic glass, almost.
And you see it everywhere, right? The analysis lists things like automotive parts, big illuminated signs, lighting systems, construction materials.
Absolutely. It's valued for that clarity and toughness. And the connection to our topic, methacrylic acid, or MAA, is a vital precursor. You need it to make PMMA.
So simple equation then.
Yeah.
More demand for PMMA means more demand for MAA.
Pretty much. And industries are definitely shifting towards those kinds of lightweight, transparent, durable materials. So PMMA is booming and MAA tags right along.
Okay, so PMMA is a huge driver. But it's not the only one, is it?
No, not at all. The analysis also highlights its increasing use in paints, coatings, and adhesives.
Right, that makes sense. Applications where you need things to stick and last.
Exactly. It offers, excellent binding strength, really good durability, and it holds up well against harsh weather. So it's key for things like acrylic-based surface coatings, sealants, industrial adhesives, that sort of stuff.
And that demand is fueled by bigger trends.
Yeah, the analysis connects it to accelerated urbanization and big infrastructure projects, especially in emerging economies where there's a lot of construction happening.
Interesting. Okay. And then there was one that seemed a bit surprising to me: personal care and hygiene.
It does seem a bit out of left field at first, yeah.
Yeah.
But the material points to its use in making super absorbent polymers, or SAPs.
Oh, okay. The stuff that goes into diapers and other hygiene products.
Exactly that. So as you see rising hygiene awareness globally and just generally more consumption of these products, particularly in places like Asia Pacific and Latin America, that drives demand for the MAA derivatives needed for those SAPs.
So maybe less obvious than PMMA or coatings, but still a significant driver.
Definitely. And then, of course, you've got the automotive and electronics sectors. They remain strong drivers as well.
Right, with everything going on there, the big shift to EVs.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Strong drivers as well.
Right, with everything going on there, the big shift to EVs, the constant miniaturization of electronics.
Precisely. The analysis talks about its use in lightweight polymers and protective coatings in both areas. Think things like automotive trim pieces or the housings for electronic components.
So its specific properties, its functionality are actually helping enable some of the innovation happening in those really dynamic sectors.
Yeah, it plays a key role. So overall, you see a pretty broad base of demand pushing this market forward.
Okay, so that's the positive side, the growth drivers. But the analysis, it also makes it very clear there are significant hurdles, restraints on the market.
Oh, absolutely. It's not all smooth sailing. There are some serious challenges.
And the first one seems pretty fundamental.
Yeah.
The health and environmental hazards of methacrylic acid itself.
Yes, this is a major factor. It's highly corrosive. It's toxic if you inhale it or get it on your skin. Handling it isn't simple.
It requires really strict procedures, protective gear, all that.
Exactly. And that, as the analysis points out, has consequences. It raises operational costs significantly for manufacturers, and it also means a heavier regulatory burden to ensure safety.
Right. Compliance isn't cheap. And adding to that complexity, there's the issue of volatile raw material prices.
Yeah, that's another big one. MAA production depends heavily on feedstocks like acetone and hydrogen cyanide.
Where do those come from?
They're often byproducts of the oil and gas sector,
Mm-hmm.
tied into petrochemical supply chains.
Oh, okay. So if crude oil prices are swinging wildly, or there are disruptions in that petrochemical supply.
It directly impacts the cost and availability of the raw materials for MAA. This creates price instability for the acid itself, which really affects the profitability and, frankly, the planning certainty for suppliers. It's a constant headache.
Makes sense. And then there's pressure from the other side, too, alternative materials.
The analysis notes that other acrylic monomers are available, and maybe more importantly, there's a growing interest in bio-based substitutes.
Which sounds like a direct response to the hazard issues and maybe the feedstock volatility, right?
Yeah.
It's driven by that whole sustainability push.
Absolutely. These alternatives might perform similarly, but offer potentially better environmental credentials or lower toxicity. In a world focused on green solutions, they represent a genuine threat to MAA's market share, especially where environmental rules are tight.
Which brings us neatly to the last big restraint mentioned. Regulations. Getting tougher.
Definitely. You've got frameworks like REACH in Europe, the EPA in the US. They impose really stringent standards.
On things like how much can be used, emission limits, labeling requirements,
Yeah,
all that kind of stuff for hazardous chemicals.
exactly. And the key thing the analysis highlights is that these rules aren't static. They keep evolving. So companies have to constantly invest in updating their documentation, their safety protocols, even their production processes, just to stay compliant.
It's a moving target, basically, and an expensive one.
It really is. So you put it all together, hazardous substance, volatile costs, competition from greener options, tightening regulations. It's a challenging environment.
It definitely paints a picture of significant pressure on the traditional way of doing things.
It does. But, the analysis doesn't stop there. It also shows a market that's actively innovating and adapting. There are some really interesting trends shaping its future.
Okay, like what? What's on the horizon?
Well, one of the big positive shifts is the move towards bio-based production methods.
Trying to make MAA from renewable sources, like
Yeah.
biomass or using fermentation.
Exactly. It's a direct response to the sustainability pressures we just talked about, trying to decarbonize the process, align with circular economy goals.
But the analysis mentioned it's still quite expensive compared to the traditional way.
True, cost is still a hurdle right now, but these bio routes are definitely gaining traction because, well, they offer that lower carbon footprint. And for many companies and governments, that's becoming increasingly important, almost non-negotiable.
Interesting. What other innovations are popping up?
Another really intriguing area is its use in 3D printing.
Oh, really? How does it fit in there?
It's being included in the formulation of high-performance 3D printing resins and advanced polymers.
Okay, and 3D printing itself is growing massively, isn't it? In healthcare, dental, consumer goods.
Right. And as it moves into more demanding applications, you need resins that are durable, that have specific properties, and that print reliably.
And MAA helps provide that.
Its characteristics, particularly things like clarity and structural integrity, make it really suitable for some of these next-generation additive manufacturing needs. It's finding new, high-value niches there.
Cool. Okay, what else?
We're also seeing a pretty significant geographical shift in production, according to the analysis,
A shift where?
primarily towards Asia-Pacific.
Right.
Manufacturers are really ramping up capacity there, places like China, India, Southeast Asia.
And why there specifically?
Several reasons. Access to more cost-effective labor, definitely improving infrastructure, and critically, being closer to those really fast-growing end-user markets in the region. All that construction, automotive, personal care demand we mentioned earlier, a lot of it's booming right there.
Right, locate production near the demand. Makes strategic sense.
And one final trend the material highlights is a rise in sort of collaborative innovation.
Meaning companies working together more.
Yeah, forming joint ventures, strategic partnerships. And the goal here often isn't just to make more standard MAA, but to develop specialized niche applications.
Moving beyond the basic commodity chemical.
Exactly. Targeting things like specialized coatings for optical fibers, high-strength functional adhesives for tough environments, unique specialty polymers with tailored properties.
And the benefit for the companies is differentiation. higher margins.
Precisely. It's about finding new revenue streams, getting away from pure price competition on the basic chemical, and offering unique solutions instead, tapping into higher value segments.
So despite the challenges, there's quite a bit of forward movement and strategic thinking happening.
Definitely. The market is clearly responding, adapting, and looking for new opportunities.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. What's the overall picture here? Based on this analysis, the methacrylic acid market seems, well, complex, defined by this real tension.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
You have these significant inherent challenges, the safety aspects, the environmental concerns, the economic volatility linked to its petrochemical roots.
Yeah, dealing with a hazardous but necessary chemical in a world that wants greener, more stable options, that's tough.
It is. But then on the other hand, its fundamental role as a building block, especially for things like PMMA, seems pretty solid. And these innovations we discussed, bio-based routes, 3D printing, specialty applications, they show real potential.
So continued growth is expected despite the headwinds.
That seems to be the consensus, yes. It's just so integral to so many things, components in cars, tech gadgets, hygiene products. It's powering a lot of modern life. It really is this balance of managing the risks while chasing the opportunities.
Right. Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe. Given how essential MAA is, but also the pressure for sustainable alternatives and stricter rules, how will all that ultimately reshape its future? You know, not just how it's made, but where it's made and what it's used for in the next 10, 20 years.
That's the big question, isn't it? A chemical most people don't think about, facing a future that's anything but simple.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.